Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, John.
Yeah, hold on.
I know this is a last minute surprise.
That's
I am
okay.
going to, I'm going
The surpise I had is that I forgot to confirm with Lynn Widmeyer. So that's just as well. There you go. And I don't know.
I kind of figured when I didn't hear. So,
Yeah,
I was talking to my good friend Greg last evening and I said, "Hey, you want to be on a podcast tomorrow morning?"
Hey, all right. Let's do it.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
But we're not. Hold on one second. Yeah, we're going
Okay, I just wanted
strong.
to know if my
Okay.
audio was working.
It is, yeah. Well, welcome. Go ahead, Karen. Introduce Greg as the celebrity that he may be.
If you only knew, John, if you only knew. Well,
So,
Greg and I call him Moose, but I guess we should, well, everybody calls him Moose, but you can be called Greg or Moose. You can let us know when it's your turn to speak. And we met years and years ago working at River and Trail Outfitters
oh, right.
in Knoxville, Maryland. And Greg has always been somebody that has inspired me, given me good unsolicited advice at times, and and has just been
I
a
wonder
great
what that
friend.
was.
And I admire what he does. He is an excellent team builder. And one thing I thought we could talk about this morning is, maybe he can touch a little bit on the climate of some of the situations he finds himself in. Has it changed with the changing climate of everything else in the world? But, with a fun spin, I told him we're pretty light and go with the flow here. And Greg, just because you haven't joined us before, we cover a little bit of everything. Be yourself. We a few curse words slip out here and there.
Oops.
What? That sounds
Ouch.
crazy talk.
We get pretty heated. John and I we like to talk about the crazy world that we all find ourselves in at this
Right.
point in time.
Yeah.
So, Greg, introduce yourself.
Hi, Greg.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hi, John.
Hey.
Yes, I lead a dual life, as Karen mentioned, to many people. As I am fortunate enough to speak around the country, people either call me Greg or Moose. The Greg people are a little more boring. So I always know if somebody asks for Moose, it's going to be a more fun conversation. But certainly I answer to both. And that sort of started with my all of my outdoor adventures. And so all of my outdoor adventures are the Moose people. And then my more Loudoun County sort of folks all call me Greg. So I'm happy to be here this morning with both of you.
What's a Loudoun County folk?
Well, I'm still actually working full time for Loudoun County. I manage a big facility there, and when I am not there, I'm either doing fun podcasts with my friend Karen, or I do lots of staff trainings and I speak at a lot of conferences. So I'm out and about whenever I'm not working at Loudoun County, except
What
for
do you
tomorrow where I'm going to a fishing show.
What do
I
you
was going
talk
to say,
about
unless you're fishing or
when
going to
you're
a fishing show.
speaking? What do you? Is it? Is this motivational, or is it? What's the? Is that a particular topic? Are you an expert in a certain stream of thought, or?
So I have a long career in working with kids at camps, and in addition to that, I have a long career in experiential education and working in the outdoors with people. This will be my 48th year as a rafting guide, coming up in 24. But I also get to do, as Karen said, I get to work with corporations and government agencies throughout the country. And we work on everything from strategic plan to organizational development to working on their cultures but I always do it in a fun sort of way.
Right.
I like to. Nobody wants to hear a boring speaker, so I like to get everybody in there and
Right.
let's get down to work on some skills. So I don't do actually that much motivational speaking, although I can. I'll get the joint rocking anytime you want, John. But I like to work on lots of skill development so that people will be better at doing their jobs tomorrow than they were today.
That's that's a lot of fun. But my son was very active in River Riders for almost 10 years. Ben.
All right.
Maybe you know him, Ben Case.
I know Ben.
Yeah. Oh, that's my son. And
Oh yeah, Ben.
yeah, right. He's working. He's
Yeah.
working for a software company now, like everybody else. But you know,
No, Ben's very talented.
so, well, that's cool because we need some team building.
You think?
Well,
one of the
you go ahead. Yeah.
my government clients are typically several of them are really trying to change their culture, which involves a whole philosophy of leadership development, and it's pretty complex. But when you get out the other side, the results have been nothing short of amazing, and more people are going to that model, and so in the sports teams and businesses and groups in general, I do lots of activities with them. I guess the highlight would be the high ropes courses that I work on, but a lot of the skill development that we do is not 30 feet in the air. So I'm very versed at doing all of that. But I've written about 53 workshops now. So when somebody asks me to speak, I send them an a la carte menu, and then we kind of, I want this and I want that, and we try to piece it all together, and off we go.
Do you find that, there's different kinds of groups, right? So there's groups in which there's a lot of internal competition. A lot of corporations are certainly like that. On the other hand, the leadership of most companies and some other organizations have been involved in require a high level of discipline in the leadership and unity, at least in action, in order to accomplish anything. So does subordination of the individual ambition to the group mission, how much does that feature in the challenges that you're asked to sort of deal with in groups?
So that is actually a great question. So the first half of the question really resides in people forgetting why they began to work somewhere. So you went there, and you were like, oh, I want to do this, or I really want to get into that. And then after a while, problems occur because people get to a sort of a comfort zone into the skills they needed to get to that point, and then they sort of plateau. And so and then the second half of the question that you suggest is that when people lose sight of the mission, or when there's no sort of roadmap and a strategic plan, then people start to fill in the gaps with some of their own ideas, which can cause problems within the ranks. But more often than not, what I see is some sort of a bottleneck in some layer of the hierarchy because they struggle with managing up and at the same time managing down. I see that very frequently.
The General Electric.
Interesting.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's interesting because I was having a conversation with a 20-something-year-old, maybe late 20, almost 30, yesterday, and he was saying how he doesn't understand how an old, he calls it old, I guess we're old, model,
There we go.
how an old model of work culture is going to succeed when everybody he knows and everybody behind him is living in such an individualistic, I've got my rights, individual rights culture, where everybody is entitled to their own opinion, even if they do join a group or institution or corporation, that you do have to conform sometimes, and we're used to that. You know, we grew up with the that was like social norms or workplace norms, where you kind of sacrificed a little bit of yourself to do something. I think that we are kind of finding ourselves in a culture that has changed drastically, and kind of, blowing the minds of some of the people in our age groups that are still trying to run a company.
Yeah. Well, GE used to have under Jack Welch anyway, an asshole of the first order, but whatever. Anyway, he had a theory that, they had what, I think 8-10 divisions in the late 70s when I was involved in negotiating with them. If you weren't, he told the vice presidents of each one of those divisions that if they weren't either number one or number two in their, market sector, that they were going to be fired and the whole division sold to somebody, because they weren't going to have any threes in their, in their ranks. So a bloodbath ensued, typically in the GE hierarchy. And this caused a certain cultural problem to develop in many parts of the company, which is that all the subordinates were lying to their superiors for fear of just chaos, knocking them out, things out of control. And of course, when everybody starts lying to their bosses, and their bosses start paying lies to their bosses, all of a sudden the CEO is running around basically with his feet planted in midair. And then a crisis develops, like one of the shops organizes into the union. Now that gets the attention, I promise you, of the owners of the company. And they then Jack had a similar approach to that problem, and it was kind of interesting. He told the affected vice president that they were no longer running their division, that instead a professional HR team was going to come in from the side, so to speak, take over the plant or the division operation, right? And find out exactly where all the nepotism, corruption, lies, blah, 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 blah was taking place. And in the meantime, the plant manager or whatever that was would have to sit around and wait for Judgment Day of some sort. And this didn't actually work. And
I think that brings up a good point for Greg. Like, do you ever walk into a situation where someone is expecting you to solve this monumental problems? Like, the whole train has derailed, but what? How do you break that into manageable chunks?
Yeah, the better question is, when do I don't run into a situation like that? I won't mention the agency, but several years ago I arrived to speak at a conference, and everyone was sort of sitting around chatting after dinner the night before the conference, and it became very clear to me that the two heads of the two biggest agencies in the nation couldn't come to an agreement as to where they wanted things to go. And I told them they had 8 hours to solve that, because I was going in front of the workforce, in the morning, and we had to speak with a unified front. So a very, very, common problem. So one of the things that's happened, it's even in some respects gotten worse since COVID, because when everybody was isolated, they actually lost their ability to communicate in the way that, well, I'll say the three of us grew up with, and the norms have been shattered, so that the types of communication that I think are effective aren't necessarily what people think are effective now. And so I can believe that my way is better, and what I grew up in, and the types of face-to-face communication that I've always known to work. But a lot of people did not grow up that way, so their interpretation is very different. So in order for me to be effective, I have to make sure that the fundamentals are covered, even if it doesn't look like something I grew up with. But then, like, if I go into a company and I say, "What's your mission?" not once have I ever gotten the same answer from anybody. So they don't, so they don't actually know, or they can't even express or articulate the company's mission. And as you suggest, John, it is very, very common, even in smaller businesses, for a fraction of people to band together because they think they have a common cause, whether it supports the mission or not. And that is a very frequent occurrence in my world.
Yes. But we used to find, now, in the union, I worked for the union for a long time, United Electrical Workers. And
shocking.
Yeah. Well, we were to some people. That's true. But one of the things I learned early on, the hard way, was that you're always trying to figure out what's it all about, Alfie? What are we trying to do here?
That's the old school reference right there.
And we're and it's easy to reduce it down. One time there was a terrible political debate in the local union, going on. And I said, well, why don't we just change everything and call ourselves the Higher Wages Party? I think we'll agree on that, and just leave everything else aside for the moment. And, that would sometimes get a reaction. But the moral essence of unionism is don't leave people behind and find something for everyone to do. That's the moral principle involved, and you can't always enforce it, but it's the reason why people try to establish seniority, right, to eliminate arbitrariness and loss of jobs, okay? Or why they, if you're on a strike, the hardest issue is getting everybody back. And if you don't, the morality of the solidarity that's involved starts to come apart. Okay, it's just like the Marine Corps. It really is. You want people to sacrifice. In order to obtain something in a union, you have to be prepared to sacrifice your personal interest for the overall good. You have to. If you don't go out on strike. Don't do it, because you're going to lose. All right? There's only one power that you have, and that's solidarity. The rest is, how much of a share can you negotiate? How much But if you fall apart, you get nothing. So that kind of discipline is tough, right? Because in business and in a capitalist economy, et cetera, the firms don't operate on that principle. I mean, they're operating on efficiency. They can't make money if they start to never lay anybody off, not in the economic environment you're in. So you have at least two, very different group principles that are kind of in attention with each other, a lot of the time. And it's easy to lose your way and and neglect the difference between good and bad compromises. What do you think about that? Good versus bad compromises.
So what I run into a lot is, so you touched on things on two different levels. So on the sort of the managerial sort of hierarchical level, a lot of the success or failure centers around how people interpret their default behaviors. And one of the most challenging problems that certainly I have is that if if there's an agency or a corporation, let's say they have a new initiative, as you might imagine, if it's a big statewide agency or if it's a national agency, you have people from different states interpreting it different ways, or different sides of a certain state, or even sometimes you get sales and management. They can't agree on whatever it is in a corporation, or even on a sports team. You don't have everybody. And we know some of our local teams were not always very successful, and sometimes determining what those default behaviors are, and then helping people to figure out what to do with them so that it ends up in a productive direction. That's the hard part. And so one of the things that I certainly try to tell people is that every company and every product has a shelf life. I mean, think about what some of the big companies were when we were younger. The Howard Johnsons and the Tower Records, and a lot of the places that have come and gone,
long gone.
So when you look at the missions, sometimes are not easy to change, and people think that their institutional value to that company or corporation or team is being asked to be not acknowledged anymore, and that's not usually the case. But this is where the really hard work of management comes in, and I think a lot of people get confused between management and leadership. And so, leadership is a relationship. Management is a title. So we have a lot of people with titles that are not good leaders. And so getting into all that's the hard work of the organizational development. That's kind of what I do. And I try not to offend too many people along the way. Right. But because, and the other side of it, I told you there was two sides. The other side of it is that when you come across a business that sort of has a shelf life, it is sometimes really hard to somebody who's getting a paycheck. It's hard to explain to them that the current model by which we are working is not sustainable.
Right.
And that is a monumental problem in government agencies, because they're going to get paid next week. So because of that, there's a different mindset than you have if you're in private industry.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Right. I mean, well, it's true of every organization has a tendency toward bureaucracy, obviously. I mean, people are assigned a job, and they don't like to be told the next week that, well, your job has changed, you got to do something else. And, because in a company, it means you're probably going to get laid off, okay? Since retraining is usually not on a big priority cost center in most companies. I'm not going to spend half my profits on retraining. I got plenty of people out there in the market I can hire. All right, so depending on the time of year or whatever. But in government, it's different, right? So in a way, you get people to work as public servants. And then, their service needs to be changed, okay? That work, technology is usually technology, sometimes just generational change, right? But technology and the people you have coming in, can they do the job or not? And can they, if there's an advanced technology that you want to implement, but it's going to eliminate half the work, and you don't have anything to do for those people, you don't have something else for them to do, then, you're going to pay, in public, you're going to pay a political price for laying them off. Even if it's justified on some, organizational or management level reason, you're going to pay a price in the public for it. And
and I think one thing that John and I talk about a lot is and when you talk about laying people off, we've talked about valuing everybody. John says it best when he says, leave no one behind. And when we think about these situations where, the monster does dominate the room, but each of these individuals that are making the wheels turn, whether it be government or, private sector corporations, there's an individual person in each of those seats or each of those jobs. And we talk about that a lot. People are spending the majority of their waking hours at work. And one thing that has always really struck me about Moose's work is how he can connect to the individual. And I think that is certainly lacking across the board in any, business, corporation, government, like where you mention Moose leadership. A good leader is going to make their people feel valued. I know that every conversation I have with Moose, when we have like 2 seconds to talk or see, I come away feeling like a stronger person, just me as a person. And I think the work that he's able to do to go in and create that humanistic value added for each individual. I know he personally has shared some a few stories where he has really impacted someone's outlook. And I think we're missing that. We're missing that in leadership of all kinds, whether it be political, business, even parenting. Like we're missing that component where there's a human soul inside of each one of those employees. And there's a story. And John, you and I, when we were out there in Martinsburg on the picket line.
Oh, it's a UAW, yeah.
We heard those people's stories. And there is a story behind each and every one of those people. And that's what I find fascinating in the work that Greg Moose does.
Well, for example, take demilitarizing the U.S. economy, which I've always been a supporter of. Came to awareness in the 60s and stuff, and the Vietnam era. So, but here's the big question. What happens to, there's millions of people involved in the U.S. military establishment, not to mention all the contracted work and weapons and everything else. And I hear people say things like, oh, well, there should be a just transition of, swords to plowshares, all kinds of great poetry. But most of that's bullshit in my experience. The only remedy is unemployment insurance and the wonderful market, okay? I'm not saying there aren't some good programs. The VA has, obviously there's a lot, there are programs. But we did this thing in the 70s and 80s and 90s with globalization, for example, where this entire kind of middle class, most of it from basically unions in manufacturing, raised incomes up where some ordinary person could send their kids to a land-grant college if they had decent grades. Okay? And that just basically went away in large swaths of the country as all these jobs got exported. Well, partly from technology, partly from just the global thing. Well, a lot of grievances of ruined families. And along comes Mr. Trump and explains, gives you an enemy, to blame. And the mass media doesn't help you clarify it much. So, yeah.
Well, and it goes back to, that when we talk about this issue is that soulful connection that people are looking for. And I want Greg to kind of comment on where he sees successes if you make the actual person behind the job feel valued.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that are going on here that are like very fundamentally important. The first thing is that as a person who's trying to get people to come together to share a common purpose, I can tell you that fear has a big part in what they decide to do. And people see, if you understand the premise, like if you have a common goal and you want people to go somewhere or you want people to change, if people have not experienced that, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's in a business or even in the interest that they have, it is oftentimes really hard to get this point across because it is not common for someone to come up and say, what do I need to do to help you succeed? That's not a common question that you get. And so part of the issue of fear is that people don't know how good a place can be if it's unknown. So now what you're asking people to do is an abstract. Like, if you do this work, we will get here. Well, if you've never been here and you don't know what it's like to be in an organization where everybody pulls their weight, or you're in a group project that everybody does their share, because we were all in high school and college where you got in a group project and 3 people did the work and 7 people sat back and watched the other 3 people do the work. So that doesn't actually stop when you get into the workforce. So there's a couple things that I find that people are fundamentally stuck on. One of them is fear. So if you don't replace what it is that they're actually afraid about with something that will lead them in the direction you want them to go, then they get stuck there. The other thing that I find, and you're gonna laugh at this, but that's okay. Change. People always tell me, people are afraid of change, and in some respects, I understand what they're saying, but they don't understand the concept. So if I'm speaking at a conference and I say, great news for all of you that came here today, when you go home, you're going to get a $10,000 bonus. Everybody goes, woo, woo. Yeah, we like that. Okay, and I say, how many people here are going to turn down that money? Everybody says, well, of course, nobody. And I'm like, but that's change. And they go, whoa, never thought about it like that. So, okay, so maybe it's not change you're afraid of. So what is it that you're afraid about? And so some of the work, John, that you were talking about, and also Karen, it's the hard work of fundamentally making it okay for people to not only succeed, but also to fail. So there's this big thing going on now about fail forward. Well, actually, if you had a pretty well thought out strategic plan, you wouldn't even have to introduce that because it would be a part of your culture, wouldn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah, you would You would already infer it. Yes.
Of course you would. And so, but there does come a time, and I am very clear when I speak with people, that regardless of your default behavior and regardless of your, as you would say, maybe your skill ability or your education or your ability to change, especially with technology, there does become a point in time where the work has to get done. So at some point, there are people that just will never run out of excuses.
Well,
they're
true.
always going to find a way that they don't want to or have to do the work. And those are the people that hold your organization back, and they will identify themselves. It becomes painfully obvious.
There used to be a...
then you have to ask the fundamental question. And I'll certainly, I know we're out of time, but I'll certainly leave you guys with this, and that is, I then sometimes have to go in and say, well, here's where we want to go. Here's like the end of the rainbow. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get there with or without you. So at some point you have to choose, despite your education, or despite your lack of knowledge, or despite your default behaviors, are you going to try to help us get there or not?
Exactly.
And sometimes that's a fundamental question that people just have to answer for themselves.
And you have to challenge people, because, I mean, decisions do have to be made, and or someone else will make them if you don't. Absolutely. Well, it's been a great conversation, Greg, and we enjoy doing this. It's good talking to folks that got different experiences.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back sometime,
cool.
Moose.
Yeah.
When you're not fishing or rafting or changing the world.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of need for the kind of temperament that you're kind of encouraging as this year progresses. I'm a little scared of what the hell is going to happen down the road. So anyway, it's been beautiful, and thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you both having me on this morning, and to all the people out there in Cyberland that are listening to these pearls of wisdom.
We currently have about 67 listening to this. I want to think about the internet, as you can tell exactly. But the podcast has been over a couple hundred downloads. So that's really
I am very honored to have shared this time with you all this morning. And, while I am a champion for change agencies, I also respect the institutional knowledge that people have. And As soon as people find out that I'm not asking them to give that up, I always get a big sense of relief. I only want people to give it up if it's not productive to the direction that we're going. And oftentimes what they know is part of the information that is the key to the future. Mm-hmm. The problem is that people just don't tell people this sort of thing. And so while it's a challenging message to hear, as you suggest, John, a little change is not bad.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
Yeah. For example, just one, like a resistance to change is one of the weaknesses of the trade union movement, and it's built in because the people are defending. The unions only get organized, believe it or not, to defend themselves. They feel they're under attack. That's why they organize. Otherwise, if it was just to attack the company, you would get very few majorities. Okay, I'm working for the guy. Why do I want to attack him? That guy. You wouldn't happen. But the defensive thing plays strong on the principle of solidarity, but weak sometimes on the principle of vision and mission. Defense is hard to play every game.
Well, as Karen suggested, everybody wants to feel valued, and that's the art of leadership. That's not the art of management. And so, when I ask people, what are the characteristics of the bosses that you've had that you didn't respect or that didn't seem to know how to lead, everybody's very quick to say, well, these are all the characteristics of leadership that they didn't have. And then, but then if I say, well, what steps did you take as a person in the organization to help solve some of those problems? I'm frequently left with silence because they didn't feel like they had either the authority or the ability to be a part of that sort of communication where everybody was able to be heard. And that's where the nitty gritty of the work really begins.
That's true. It's very,
what are those barriers, and then, how do we get past them? And that's
right.
But I do it in a really fun way because I get people moving around, and once we practice a skill or talk about a skill, then we actually put it into practice in the workshops, and people then feel more empowered to try to put it into practice when they get to work tomorrow.
I met someone like you when I was about 17, and I was invited to go to a training session by a person who was active in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, actually SCEF, so it was educational, which was related to it. Anyway, and there was a woman there who was trying to find out which of us hated segregation and racial hatred the most. And we were, everyone volunteered to be the leader at that gathering on that anyway. So there wasn't any problem with volunteers there. And she says, so here's the deal. Those of you who have the most commitment, okay, and the most indignation and the strongest sense of injustice, you should fill up your knapsack with as many stones as you think you can carry. And which everybody went about doing. And now, climb that mountain out there, which was near the camp. So your bravado early was going to be a bit of a burden coming up. And so coming up and come down, and when you laid that knapsack down, she didn't have to explain the message.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody.
All right,
Take care of each other.
I have to step off. So sorry. Thank you all very much for having me this morning. I appreciate it. I wish you well. Maybe I'll see you down the road somewhere.
I hope so.
We can make some magic.
All right, Pam.
Absolutely.
Take care of each other.
Thanks so much.
It's late, but everything comes next.
Recordings